it was almost like seeing a shuttle launch, right? Because you'd see the crew, they came out and then, they came down to their boat and they're in their flight suits, It's like, there they are, there's the crew, and everyone's waving. And as soon as they got on their launch to go out to the boat, all of these horns just started going off over the whole lake. All these people just so excited and wanted to cheer them and thank them. And, no one wanted the plane to go, don't get me wrong, but like it was the day, and there was just boats everywhere. And
G'day everyone, and welcome to episode 152 of the Flight Training Australia podcast, the podcast all about flight training and flying in Australia and beyond. I'm your host, Trent Robinson. Thank you for joining me. We've got a fantastic episode today. Just before we get into it, a little reminder that our special guest today, Dan, is not only a great guy, but he is a fantastic author as well. He is the author of the children's books, Marty the Mallard series. There's 2 books out, and with Christmas coming, cannot think of a better option to get your little aviator into flying, exposed to some flying boats, and 2 fantastic stories of Marty the Mallard. They are available on Amazon now. The link for the website is in the episode description, and I have both copies and can thoroughly recommend a good read for the kids, the grandkids, or that little aviator in your life. Get on the Amazon link and get your copy today. All right, grab some popcorn, grab a drink, sit back, relax, and now enjoy Dan's story of his recount from his trip to Canada and the Martin Mars. So today's guest has an incredible passion for seaplanes. In August, he embarked on a trip to Canada, hoping for a chance to see the Martin Mars take to the skies for one last time. What began as a bit of a gamble, uncertain if everything would even go ahead as planned, turned into an unforgettable adventure. And here to share the story of us is my very good mate, Dan, that Mallard Guy Bolton. Dan, how are you, bud?
G'day, Trent. Great to be back behind the mic, mate, and great to be back on another episode of Flight Training Australia, mate. And must say, congratulations on the recent milestone of 150 episodes. I can still remember you and I having a chat, I can't believe it was 3 years ago, mate, on all about you asking me about how I run my podcast. And
this whole podcast thing.
Yeah, it's nuts, hey. I can't believe it was 3 years ago. And congratulations on the 150, mate. And I must say, as you know, I'm still a regular listener to many of your episodes, mate, and loving the content. So well done.
Thank you very much. No, like I said, you led the way and told me all about it. And I'm glad that we're finally talking again, because I know with family, you haven't been able to do as many as you've wanted to. So this is a chat that we definitely needed to have. And as we're not flying in the Mallard much at the moment, in the off season, this is what we've had to resort to.
Exactly, mate. But yeah, no, it has been a bit difficult to try and keep up. Not that I was any expert of podcasting, mate. It's just, I'd love to share a bit of feedback with you about how I did mine. And it's good to be back behind the mic again, because I do love it. I do miss it. I wish I could get more content out about seaplane stuff. But as you mentioned, 3 kids now, very busy lifestyle. Some things have to go to the side, unfortunately.
That's all right. Well, we're here now. So, look, let's get straight into it in case someone needs picking up from school or anything. And let's just talk about how this whole sort of idea came about, first of all, and then we'll talk about what actually happened along the way. Yeah,
well, I guess, so to start off with, as we kind of mentioned, my podcast, On the Step with that Mallard Guy, kind of starts back there, really, the story, because with my podcast, I was interviewing a lot of people all around the world, all about seaplanes, float planes, flying boats. And it took me to talk to a man called Peter Killen, all about the amazing Martin Mars flying boat. Peter Killen flew the Martin Mars as a firebombing pilot, and was probably the last pilot to actually fly the Mars before they were kind of grounded in around about 2016. Anyway, this was in 2020. Got the podcast done, and Peter and I became pretty good mates just through social media. I obviously didn't get to meet Peter, being from Canada, and we stayed in touch through Facebook, etc. And the obsession with the Mars, etc., was always one. Really, my obsession with large 4-engine flying boats is one that's just grown over time since I've flown the Mallard. But then kind of, I guess the story evolves in 2022. These aircraft had been sitting, as I mentioned, from in about 2016, they'd kind of stopped flying. And there wasn't much or many plans that were in the public as to what was actually going to happen with them. They weren't doing any bombing. Their bombing that they had done as firebombing aircraft had really died off in the last few years of their operating in service. So there was always questions about what was going to happen to the aircraft. And in 2022, early 2022, the pretty famous Platinum fighter aircraft sales post came up to say that the Hawaii Mars was actually for sale for offers over $5 million. Now, this is an incredibly big aeroplane. $5 million doesn't sound like a lot when you look at some other private aircraft that you could buy out there. The problem with the Mars aircraft is they're so expensive to operate and require a huge team of flight crew, flight engineers, and engineers with experience on these aircraft to be able to keep it in the air. Now, this didn't seem to fortunately go anywhere with the sale, and I'm not 100% sure. Probably some of the facts that I'm going to share over this episode probably not going to be, might need to be fact checked, or I'm not going to say too much just in case that's not entirely accurate. But I'm not sure actually if it did sell at all. But later on in earlier this year, there was talk of the Hawaii Mars actually getting ready to fly again after it didn't sell, and to be relocated to the British Columbia Aviation Museum, or the BC Aviation Museum. So I guess that's where the next part of the story comes in, is that I heard this, come to fruition, that the Hawaii Mars was potentially going to fly again. And this would then make it one of the last ever flights of a pure 4-engine radial flying boat only aircraft, not an amphibious flying boat, because obviously there are some being built in China and Japan. The Shin Meiwa is an example of a 4-engined turboprop flying boat as big as a 737 that's currently flying, I believe, just in the Japanese Air Force or Navy or something similar. They're obviously being built. China's got a model very similar to that that's being built over there, but these are amphibious aircraft. But this, the Martin Mars doesn't have any wheels, so it's purely a flying boat. And this is potentially going to be the last times we ever see a flying boat of this size and this era ever fly again. So,
yeah. Well, we haven't seen them, have we? Like since the Clipper, the Sunderland, all those ones are all from the 40s and just all the museums, but nothing flying. So yeah, it's just an amazing opportunity.
Exactly. One of the other ones was the Fantasy of Flight owner. His name will come to me in a second. I'm sure you know off the top of your head, Trent. I can't think of it. I'll come to that in a second. But
no.
The Fantasy of Flight is a place in Florida. It's owned by a guy, Kermit Weeks. Sorry, his name is Kermit Weeks. He's restored a lot of old airplanes there, and he got a Sunderland flying boat, I think it was, not a Sandringham, I believe, but he flew that back from England in the 90s, and it's actually currently at Fantasy of Flight, and he says that he'll one day eventually get it back up and flying. Once again, this is a pure 4-engine non-amphibious flying boat, so the logistics of that, keeping that thing in the air is very difficult. But other than that, like you said, Trent, we haven't seen these aircraft, they're high. Well, their time of their careers was in the 30s and 40s and, maybe early 50s, but that was it. And then once, World War II started or ended, a lot more land-based airports were being built and land planes were taking over, especially as the jet age came around as well. And flying boats were too expensive and too hard to maintain. So this was potentially an opportunity that, I thought about and said, well, I'm a big lover of flying boats. This opportunity does not come around and may never come around ever again. So we've got to maybe seize on this one, and that I did.
No, 100%. Oh, no, and I'm so glad that that happened because as we were talking before you went, it was such a gamble that, it's hard enough getting a student ready for a specific date and time to be ready for a flight test and the logistics of that. But to go to the expense of an international trip to see possibly a glimpse of an aeroplane, because that was really all you were going for, was to maybe just witness the event and then to turn out the experience that it ended up being. It was just awesome.
Yeah, and I guess preparation and planning, which you talk about a lot in your podcast for other topics.
Do listen.
Yeah, exactly. Was probably one of the keys. I mean, when it got first announced and it was just on the radar, I obviously reached out to Pete to get a bit of inside goss myself to find out when the likelihood of it happening was, etc. And it was only a few months away. They basically had kept the aeroplane in quite a good state, sitting there. And I talk about that with Peter in an episode I did just before I went to Canada. And so they kept it in really good shape. So there wasn't really that much they had to do to get the aircraft serviceable again, which was quite interesting. So, look, it came up, and initially I was speaking to a good mate of mine, Ben Williams, who has the Buccaneer that I do a bit of training on. And, I mean, the worst advice you can get is any financial advice from an orthopedic surgeon. But he was very much in the means of saying, Dan, this is right up there in the bucket list of Dan. So I think you should take this with, if you can make it happen, because you won't look back at it in 10 years' time and say, how much you missed staying back in Darwin to maybe do a bit of extra flying on the Mallard, or, to read kids' books at night time for an extra 3 days, and miss out on this opportunity. So I did take his advice, and we kind of looked more and more into it. And it was funny, I kind of did, because of the cost, and, cost of living is obviously a huge thing at the moment, and like you said, the risk as well. I kind of put it in the back of my mind, just that it would kind of go away and it wouldn't kind of surface itself. But then Ben kind of kept hounding me, and it was only about a month out from it actually kind of happening that Ben was like, righto, how can we make this happen? And is it going to happen? And I kind of then went back in contact with Peter, and he kind of had some pretty dates that he was pretty certain that would happen on. And then looked up some flights, mate, and I guess, yeah, that's when it all happened. But
the rest is history.
Exactly, yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about what the Martin Mars actually is for those who are not aware, because I know with the way it came into the media and obviously the postings that you were doing and others were doing, it certainly started to dominate Facebook and Instagram for quite a bit, but most people probably wouldn't have been as familiar with it before that time.
Yeah, so the Martin Mars is pretty much the largest flying boat that ever went in production, other than the Spruce Goose, which was Howard Hughes's 8-engine flying boat made of all wood from memory. That only flew once, and it is arguable whether it actually flew or not. It was in ground effect, but there is video footage of it leaving the surface of the water, and then it never flew again. And that actual aircraft is in a museum in the States, which is on my other to-do list in the future.
Yes, I've actually seen the Spruce Goose.
Oh, wow, there you go.
In 1991, I went.
Wow, jealous.
That was in its old location. It was in the big dome hangar with the Queen Mary.
Wow.
And I had my little model that I built and everything else.
Amazing.
But yeah, I think it's moved now.
Yes, exactly. I think it's the Evergreen Museum, but don't quote me on that one. So yeah, it is the largest, pretty much 4-engine flying boat ever built. Other than that, just to put it in perspective, the wingspan of the Martin Mars is greater than a 747-200, I believe. I don't think it's greater than the 300 or 400s. It is that big. This is a flying boat. Remember, it's doesn't go on land. It just has to sit out on a mooring, and it's got it's basically a 747 sitting out in the middle of a lake, which is just nuts. And it can only be really fathomed, I guess, going and actually seeing it in up close, how big this airplane actually is.
Yeah, well, I think it's like 61 meters.
Exactly, yep.
I think this 747-200 is about 59.64 meters.
Just about, yeah. You're good with those figures, mate. Tell you what.
That's all right. I've got a little production crew here.
Exactly.
Really
Yeah. I can hear them all chirping away in the background. So, like a lot of probably big aircraft of its time, there was very few made. There was only 7 of these aircraft built back in 1945. So, almost as old as the Mallard, or actually probably just outdates the Mallard by a couple of years, which is quite interesting. That was basically used in the Navy to transport troops. But then obviously, 1945 was near the end of the World War II. So it then didn't really have much of a role. And then it was in the 50s, the late 50s, I believe it was. I think it was 1959 was when the aircraft, there was, I think, 4 left, and they were sold. They were going to be basically sold for scrap. But then a Canadian company, which was known as Forest Industries Flying Tankers, or FIFT, they ended up buying the 4 aircraft and then converted them to big water bombers by putting in big tanks, etc. So from 1959, these aircraft have basically been based on Sprout Lake in Vancouver Island in Canada at the one spot, which is insane to think. And we'll probably touch base on this later, but when I was there meeting people, this is a huge thing for Sprout Lake residents, because this lake is covered with houses along the outside. Like, right next to the tanker bases, there's other people's homes, So this whole event was nuts for them. It was really sad to see the aircraft flying away for the final time. But luckily, the British Columbia Aviation Museum is actually on Vancouver Island. And so, it's only a 2-hour drive to see their old friend once again.
Yeah.
That basically from 1959, these aircraft were used, and some say these were some of the best firefighting aircraft that Canada had used, British Columbia had used, just due to their volume of water that they could drop on a fire. And but now, unfortunately, with the advent of a lot of single-engine water scoopers, such as the Fireboss, you got your kind of twin-engine multi-crew fire bombers like the CL-415 water scoopers.
Yeah.
The use or the need of such a big aircraft and the cost of running this aircraft has kind of outweighed its use or need, and has been grounded, and this is where we're at now.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's one of those things where you've got those sort of aircraft, and they are awesome, but as we said, with land-based, with the ability to do all these land refuels and everything else, it's unfortunately just good things come to an end, isn't it? But we've had the magic of having these things in the air, and like I said, there are other things being built, and there's talk of the Albatross maybe returning to the skies, who knows, all these things, but we'll just have to go see them in museums for the time being, I guess.
Well, that's it. And that is one good thing that's happened, is that the aircraft will be at a museum where people can actually see it and appreciate it. And it does look a lot bigger on the land, on its beaching gear, than it does on the water, which is pretty neat. But probably one thing I should say as well is that with its history, it was then sold later on in 2007, I think, to Coulson Aviation. And Coulson is a big firebombing company over in the States. And for those, obviously this is mainly an Australian podcast, a lot of people would have heard of Coulson bringing their aircraft over to Australia every summer, mainly the Hercules, but I think also now the 737s that they've got that are coming. And Coulson have basically operated this aircraft ever since. And it's now going to be, as we said before, mate, in the museums.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's duck across to Canada.
Yep.
And you got a bit of a plan in place, so you knew roughly when this flight was going to take place, all things going well. You got there a few days earlier, and you made contact with a few friends or colleagues from online, and thought, "Hey, I'm in town. Anything happening?" And what did you do to fill in the time beforehand, and what ended up happening?
No, it's one of the cool things with the podcast was I got to meet a lot of people overseas, and got obviously good following through the socials from a seaplane perspective, and I met a couple of Aussies actually who were in Harbour Air working. I met them in Broome when I did a 3-week stint over there last year, and they were actually working at Harbour Air. So as soon as I landed, I kind of went over there and said hello to them, and then was lucky enough to get on a flight from there across to Victoria. So there was some seats available for that. So I got on an otter, which is the first time I've seen an otter in person. And then got the flight across with James there, which was really cool. And just a different, it was like an airline, Harbour Air on the water. It's just nuts to see, like full check-in area and, bag tickets and all this kind of stuff. And then, you go down to your, there's like 24 otters, twin otters, caravans, beavers, all just sitting on these docks down below, For a guy who's been involved with seaplanes basically all of his aviation career, I've never seen anything that big, because I've been basically based in Australia. But it was just spectacular to see. The
photos you had was amazing. It's just like Darling Harbour ferries, but just in acid, isn't it?
Exactly, mate. Yeah, and just the there was
in and out and...
there was their own kind of control tower there in the harbour there, So that was just really cool. Just aircraft taking off and landing every couple of minutes, right out in the front there, and heading
what's that
off.
servicing to justify that little operation there? I guess it's just a lot of remote locations.
Well, that's it. And BC, British Columbia, has a lot of towns that are on the coastline. And if you look at it on a map, there is just, islands everywhere, but also just protected water everywhere. So seaplanes, ferries are so easy to use. But there was also a big distance. It was a 40-minute flight from Vancouver Seaplane Terminal to Victoria, which is the southern end of British Columbia. And so 40 minutes is a long way on a ferry. And the great thing about the seaplanes is you get dropped down right in the downtown precinct, rather than maybe doing a domestic -8 flight, for example, that goes from the big airports to the big airports. So on that such a short sector, you're probably losing so much more time having to go out to the airport, whereas you can go from downtown Vancouver to downtown Victoria and be there in 40 minutes. So they're doing a lot of scheduled services, I guess you'd say, to a lot of the towns along the coast there, but then charters as well, etc. So yeah, just flat out, and international seaplane flights, which is really cool. I'm not sure how many Harbour Air do, but Seattle in America is only just around the corner basically, and there's a lot of flights that go back and forth internationally on VFR Beavers or caravans or twin otters.
Yeah, right.
It's a different way of flying over there for sure.
Literally a whole nother world.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So once you got to do that.
Yeah, so got down to Victoria, got a hire car for the week, and then first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to go and see the museum, because that was in Victoria.
On the way
so I went
out.
and checked out. Yeah, I went and checked out the BC Aviation Museum. Had a contact there that I've been talking to about this whole thing, and met him, Greg. He's a lovely guy, and he took me around the whole museum, which was really cool. There was some good flying boat content there and seaplane content, as you'd expect for that area. That was great fun. And then got to meet up, then continued on and stayed in a town a bit further up, and got to meet a guy who I had on my podcast as well, who I'd only met once before in Vietnam, Steve Stackhouse, who was a Martin Mars captain as well, and stayed with him and had a few beers, which was really cool and good to catch up with him. And then from there, the next day, I then prioritised I only had a really, I think it was 8 days in total basically of being in Canada. So I then prioritised getting myself to Sprout Lake and to maximise any time there. And one thing, this is, it's funny planning a holiday with 3 kids and a wife versus going back to planning a holiday by yourself, because when you're by yourself, you don't really care where you stay, what you do, and it's very flexible, you know what I mean? And one thing, I just didn't book any accommodation anywhere. I just figured that I'd make it work when I got over there, you know what I mean? And then Steve was like, mate, I've got a cabin on Sprout Lake. If you want to stay there, here's the keys, go for your life. So I ended up giving him his keys to his cabin he had on Sprout Lake for, I think, 3 nights, ended up staying there, which made it very easy to base myself around that area and make my way down to see the Mars.
Oh, great.
But yeah,
no,
so
it's so good to have those contacts, isn't it? And that's where everyone's just so happy to to have you over and chat and just talk nonstop aviation.
Well,
It
that's
doesn't
it.
get
And
any better.
I mean, you've spoke a lot about contacts, I think, in your episodes about, advice to people. I think aviation community is small. The seaplane community itself is a lot smaller. And, you look after your own, if you know what I mean. And
Yeah.
we, if any of those guys ever were over this way and wanted to come, we're in, trying to see the Mallard or something from so far, you'd go out of your way to make sure that they were
Absolutely.
looked after and got a great experience. And that's exactly what they were doing on this end. So, shout out to Steve, who was just a legend, just lined me up with all these connections, especially on Sprout Lake as well. He knew a lot of people around the lake that passed me on to, which was amazing. But, so I ended up leaving there early in the morning and getting to meet Peter for breakfast the first time in the morning there. We just I went direct to Port Alberni, which is the kind of main hub before Sprout Lake. Got to meet the great man finally in person, and we had breakfast together, and then we drove out. And I think that's something I'll never forget is driving into the Coulson tanker base for the first time and just walking out to the shore edge and seeing the great Martin Mars sitting on the mooring out there in the middle of the lake there, just off the tanker base. That was a spectacular sight to see, but also in some ways it didn't really give me that sense of the size yet, if you know what I mean. It was
still too far away.
It was still too far away. There was nothing around it to really give you that size comparison, if you know what I mean. But then as we walked around the corner, I saw the second Mars, which is Philippine Mars, which we'll talk about shortly, still up on the ramp on its beaching gear. And like I said before, on the beaching gear, these aeroplanes are just massive. And that really started to put in perspective how big these aeroplanes are. Which was incredible.
Yeah, well, what is it? It's like, so we said before that the Mallard's about 20-odd metre wingspan. This is 60. Length
three Mallard widths. Nuts.
Yeah, 3 Mallard wings. So I don't even know if it'd fit in our parking area at the front of the hangar there. 36 metres long versus about 15, 16 for us. 6 metres high versus nearly 12. 75 tonne versus our 6.3. So it's just a mammoth machine.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that was just in awe of it. And I guess I was able to just kind of soak it in. Pete was busy with clients and whatnot. And I was able to just stand there and kind of soak it in and, really get to explore it. But then, so one thing Coulson was doing, so to get this aeroplane ready for its final flight. So the goal was to fly this aeroplane from Sprout Lake and do a kind of farewell tour, I guess you'd say, of a lot of BC and all of the communities that it helped out for so long as a firebomber. And then it would do its final landing in a bay just to the west of Victoria Airport, which is where the BC Aviation Museum is. And so to prepare for that, they wanted to do a lot of obviously ground runs or water runs, make sure the engines were up to standard and were all running well, etc. Iron out any defects that they might have had, and they would also need to do a couple of test flights, mainly for pilot recurrency, believe it or not, because these pilots haven't flown this aeroplane for so long. So it's funny, like when you're preparing for such an event like this as to the final flight, there's going to be subsequent flights that occurred due to the fact that people need to get ready for the final flight. So there was actually 2 other flights that they did prior to this. But the taxi experiences, Coulson created a package where people could pay to be on these taxi experiences. It was quite clever, really, because it gave people an opportunity to be involved in the aeroplane, to go out and taxi on this aeroplane, because it's not getting airborne. So it's basically just a boat, right? So
Yes.
all of the aviation regulations can probably just be forgotten about and just load the thing up doesn't have to have seats, it's just a boat, basically. So get people on board, sell it as an experience, and away we go. So Pete was doing these runs. They'd basically go for an hour. They'd basically start up all the engines, taxi the aircraft out of the main channel where the tanker base is, and then down to a long run. They'd do engine run-ups, and then they would get it up on the step and do a step taxi down the lake and then bring it back. And the whole thing lasted about an hour. On this day,
So good.
on this day, Peter was preparing for a trip with actually the Coulson family on board. And I was very fortunately asked if I was interested in joining, I guess you'd say it that way. Because I certainly didn't have the dollars to pay for it. I think it's still available now for Philippine as well. So I think you can go and check it out. I think it's $5,000 US to be involved, which is not cheap, but it is a once in a lifetime opportunity really to be involved. And that was one of the most incredible experiences I've had from an aviation or even life experience. Just being on that airplane, it was unreal. The logistics of operating a 4-engine flying boat of that size is just out of this world. You know what I mean? So for a lot of people who aren't aware, like an aircraft like this has obviously its cockpit, and then about 4 or 5 meters behind it is the engineering station. Back there is where you'll find majority of the dials for the aircraft engines, the systems, the fuel, hydraulics, etc., all in this one huge big panel. And you can see photos of this if you Google it or you look on my Instagram. I've got a video of a walk around of the whole airplane. So and like, okay, how does the pilot then talk to the flight engineer? Well, they've got headsets obviously, but there's little push buttons to talk on the floor, for example, for the flight engineer. So he sits there with his feet, and like when he wants to push to talk, it's with his feet, and then that'll radio through to the whole comms of up to the captain, and then there'll be the bowman who's standing in the nose of the aircraft ready to release the buoy. Now Peter, as the captain, he's sitting up once everything's ready to go. There's he'll be deciding the way that the aircraft's sitting and potentially whatever boat traffic is around. He'll then give out a sequence of engine starts, which engine we're starting first, and then the other ones. So it might be that they'll start engine number 3 first, which is the inboard on the right wing. It's obviously counted 1, 2, 3, 4 from left to right. And then he'll go 3, 2, 4, 1, for example, and the flight engineer will write that down, and that's the sequence that when Pete's ready for it, so the flight engineer starts it at the back. All he can mainly see is a couple of small little windows looking out at the engines and just a huge big panel of gauges.
Lots of dials.
Yeah. And then once the engine's started, the bowman will let go. There's also a guy who hangs around in a boat who, in case the aircraft, and this actually happened on one occasion, they couldn't get a start on one of the engines, and they basically, in that scenario, you can't redock the aircraft to the buoy. So you then have to go back and just basically shut down floating freely and get the boatman to come and pick you up and then tow you around. And that can create so many hazards if it's quite windy or, if there's other vessels around, etc. So then, once all engines are started, then Pete will then taxi the airplane out. And the Mars has reverse. Like we've probably seen it through my videos, some of your videos, Trent, on the Mallard, how a normal flying boat, twin-engine flying boat, won't have a water rudder for directional control. It's all the directional control is controlled via the differential power of the engines. And the Mars has reverse on the inboard 2 engines only, but the way you activate it, you can't just use it like we do going into beta and reverse for the turboprops. It's a bit more complicated. So a lot of the directional control is mainly used by just controlling the outer engines. So, adding power to the outboards 1 and 4 to keep the plane straight. And the plane will always wander. So Peter, which was really cool, he basically stands up, and there's a little hatch above the head of this airplane. So he basically stands up, opens that hatch up, and is standing there. These power levers are in between the pilot seats, and they're quite long. And he's basically standing there and using his fingertips to control whilst his head's out the window. It's some sort of Flintstones.
Much like a boat captain.
Exactly, yeah.
I noticed that.
Yeah. So that was really cool just to see the logistics of that. And the problem with power only instead of reverse is you're always adding power. You're always accelerating in these turns. So if you get yourself stuck, you can only power out of it rather than stopping the airplane. So the forward planning which is a seaplane skill because all seaplanes don't have brakes, so that's something you learn. But going out and, this would attract, 30 or 40 boats and jet skis every time it went out because this was the last one, so, and this is the summer holidays for Canada as well. So everyone's out on the lake when the Mars starts up. And to avoid these boats, sometimes they get very close, especially to the floats off the wing. So yeah, sometimes you're doing quite a speed. It puts out a fair wake as well, which is really cool to see. So yeah, we'd round the corner and then Pete would then do the engine run-ups with the flight engineer. Well, actually the flight engineer would do the engine run-ups. And the way they do that is Peter basically gives over 2 of the engines at a time, either 2 or 3 or 1 and 4. And the flight engineer just sits there in the back and then he has control with his set of power levers. And you watch in the cockpit, the power levers, they kind of move by themselves. So they're linked together. So as the flight engineer raises the power to do engine run-ups like we would on our Cessna 172s or 206s, Pete's kind of still eyes out. He's using engines 1 and 4 to control the aeroplane in its direction. And then there's the flight engineer, Dave, in the back there's doing engine run-ups, all the similar stuff you do on small pistons, mag checks and, doing a bit of a feather check or, a governor check. That's all being done. And now, remember, as I said before, power means more speed. So the plane now is actually starting to plow through the water. We're probably doing 20, 30 knots doing these engine run-ups, and there's no slowing it down. So you just need a long straight line. You need to make sure no one's in front of you and you just let the airplane go where it wants to go, if you know what I mean. And then he'll swap over and do 1 and 4. And you almost, I think at one stage they probably got it onto the step doing engine run-ups, which was pretty crazy to think, so that's just how you do engine run-ups in a big 4-engine flying boat, I guess. And then, Pete would then turn it around and at the end of the kind of lake area, the main run, and go to full noise and get this thing up and onto the step and pull the power back, and we'd step taxi around at 60 knots. And like I said before, there's no seatbelts are on, so people are sitting up in the nose with the nose hatch open, getting 60 knots of airflow in their face as they're sitting out riding this thing. Just incredible. They'd close all the doors up at this stage. So during the displacement taxi or the slow speed taxi, they'd have a lot of the side doors open so you could kind of, wave to all the boats and experience the noise of these engines. And yeah, it was just, it was incredible, mate. But I think probably the other thing was the whole aspect of this is, not only did I want to be involved somehow on the aeroplane, I think it was just as exciting to see the aeroplane from the water. So my next mission was to try and get on one of these boats to go and chase it, you know what I mean, and get some footage of the Mars on the water.
Try and get in the way like everyone
exactly,
else.
So Pete had another trip straight after this one, and there was a guy who followed us around who was just in like a wake boat by himself, probably, maybe late 50s or something. And I just asked the guys at Coulson to take me over and say hello to this guy. And I just said, hey, mate, mind if I go for a ride with you if you're chasing the Mars? He's like, yeah, sure, come on. So I told him I was from Australia. He loved that. Gave me a beer in the end. We were having a beer together by the end of it.
Express ticket to anywhere.
Exactly, mate. And so we ended up watching it for the next hour on the boat. And
how was that?
That was really cool because you got to experience the sound of it from the outside.
I was going to say, can you still feel that power from the...
Yeah, absolutely.
The sound vibrations.
Yeah. And hearing Pete power up an engine to steer the aeroplane, it really just... And more the throttling back as well, the hearing the popping of the engines, these engines, we didn't really touch on those at all, mate. They are the incredible, the right
cyclone,
right duplex cyclone. Yeah. So radial engine, for those, probably who more listen to your podcast, used to kind of inline engines, 18 cylinders, 18, so 2 rows of 9. End up 2,500 horsepower, 2,500. So, to think about re-engineering this aircraft to try and get it back into service with more modern aircraft, I don't think there's a PT6 out there that actually has enough. The highest model PT6s I think are up in the late 1800s. So they'd have to go with something that's like up there for like the Hercules, for example. That's a huge engine. So hearing that was amazing. Watching it get on the step and the speed as well. You can't keep up with this thing, and all it's doing is step taxiing. 60 knots along the water.
Like you said, 50, 60 knots. Like most boats are peaking out at 30 max. So
yeah, to be close to it as it powered up and went to full power, and just to watch the spray, and really the thing just accelerate really quickly past you, and climb onto the step, and just off it goes. You just can't keep up with it in a speedboat. Was really impressive. And then it would do a big 180 step taxi turnaround or whatever, or unless it started its run down the other end, and it would go past you and just roar past you, and the echoing of the sound of the mountains around you. Yeah, it was just it was really huge. For day one, it was pretty epic, mate. Yeah.
You would have been happy.
Very, very happy, yeah, mate. Yeah, it was an incredible first day, I guess, on the Mars.
Yeah, so you've now basically, got more access and seen more and touched more than you ever thought you could. But that wasn't the end of it. So you then got some time to walk up on top of the wings. You got through the whole aircraft, front to back, left to right.
Yeah,
and,
so...
what was that like? Just, it takes us 3 seconds to walk from one end of the Mallard to the other, but this thing.
Well, yeah, and that was probably part of the experience that they were providing, was after the flight, when they got back onto the mooring there, you could come up onto the roof and have a look, and it's nuts how big it is up there. It's so that we did this thing called the world's largest seesaw, right? Now, with the Mallard, for example, so just stepping back a bit with a flying boat, it's got 3 points of contact, right? You've got your hull in the middle, and you've got your 2 outer floats. And what will always happen, because of stability, basically, is that the aircraft will always have one float contacting the water as it's just sitting there, floating. Now, with the Mallard, for example, we don't do anything to manage which of those floats is in the water. It's just as is, whatever happens. With an aircraft this big, now these floats were probably almost the size of a speedboat themselves, right? They are absolutely huge. And what that means is, if you have the aircraft just naturally listing from side to side and having one float, contact the water, it falls from probably about 3 or 4 meters. And with a bit of momentum, it can come down. It probably could crush or do a bit of damage, obviously, to the float, but do a bit of damage to a boat that's or someone on paddle boards, because there was lots of them, people in canoes, etc. So Coulson managed the fuel to make sure that the right wing was always the wing that would stay in the water by having more fuel on that side. But what that meant was we could go up to the top there, and we could do what we call the world's biggest seesaw. So they'd get us to walk all the way out the left or the port wing, and we'd walk all the way out until the balance point would be tipped, and the wing would just drop. It was pretty slow, but it was pretty cool feeling, this wing dropping down and big splash into the water. They'd either have someone at the rear door or on the nose to keep the area clear for it to happen. But that was a pretty neat thing. But there's so many.
That would be very cool.
Yeah, there's just so many unique things about this airplane, like the wing spar area in between the upper surface of the wing and the lower surface is nearly 6 meters. So you can walk, you can actually walk in between the wings, and
cord line,
the cord line, and so the way it was designed, for example, was that engineers could actually access the rear of the engines via a door at each firewall of each engine in flight if there was a problem, and potentially do some basic maintenance to see if you can get the engine running again. So I was able to go through there, it's very dark, obviously, but with a torch you can walk through the wing there, and I got to see that door that's on the firewall of each engine in one that was in maintenance, which was really cool. On top of the wing as well, there's a compartment that has it basically accesses that area. It's just a big lid, a locker lid basically, that it's flush with the skin on top. And you can open that up, and inside that are these things called C stands. So obviously a flying bird has so many logistics issues with maintenance that they keep these stands in the wing. And what they do is you pull them out, and on both sides of an engine, on the leading edge of the wing, on both sides is these two little holes in the leading edge. Now the C stand then latches into these holes, and you lower this stand down beside the wing, and it's in place. Then an engineer can actually stand out beside the engine and do some more maintenance on the water. Imagine if they were at some lake in the middle of nowhere and had some spares on board to change a cylinder or something like that. So now they've got the ability to do that maintenance. So that was really cool to see. And actually, as I mentioned before, there was one where they had an engine start that didn't happen, and they did have a few issues with a certain engine that they were ironing out this whole time. And they actually got the C stand out and did a quick change, and within half an hour or so, the plane was back up and running again. So it was really cool to see that. In the tail area, because the tail is so high up, and obviously to do a daily inspection, you're doing that from a boat, right? You're just driving a boat around to have a look at this thing. But there are some daily inspection things that you have to do walking on the airplane, and one was actually to climb out of the tail and onto the horizontal stabilizer, and that's almost as big as a Mallard wing itself. Is just the horizontal stabilizer, which is crazy. But then you notice that built into the vertical stabilizer, there's all of these footholes and little latches or steps that are actually built into the skin that would retract into the skin. You just kind of pull them out with your hands, and it creates a ladder that you can then climb the whole, vertical, the fin basically, to get to the top if you need to do any maintenance or daily inspection. So
it's just mammoth on all proportions.
Yeah, well, it probably didn't mention before that it is a 2-story airplane. So as you board via a vessel, you come in onto the side of the airplane on a boat, you climb into the lower story, and then if you're depending on where you are when you get dropped off, generally it's at the front, there's a kind of circular staircase that takes you up to the flight crew compartment, I guess, which is forward of the wing up to the cockpit. Behind the wing, there's the two APUs are located. They're just little generators, basically, that I think they're just diesel generators that run in that little area there behind the wing. And then rear of that is like an upstairs area, which on these Mars were not really used for anything. But they would have been used for general seating for troops, etc. And then downstairs, there was a dinghy, for example, Trent. Like, the back area, there was a dinghy sitting there, like just stacked to the side of the plane, and the dinghy looked tiny. Like I think it was like a 10 horsepower engine just mounted to the side of the wall of the plane inside the hull there, just sitting there. And you still had all this space. Like, it's not like it was taking up room. You had to walk around it. It was just, it's so big. And then also in the middle there, you have all the water tanks. And then up the front, you've got the nose bay area with the huge big anchor and anchor winch. What else was there? I think there was a toilet in the front there somewhere as well. Or no, actually, I think there was a toilet in the end. But just huge aircraft. One of the other cool things actually to see was the side doors under the wing. There were these tracks on the underside of the wing and leading into the hull, and they were for cranes. So they would have cranes permanently installed inside the airplane that could come and slide along the wing, the starboard wing or the right wing, outside of the fuselage, and could pick up like a Jeep, for example. And that Jeep would then be craned into the airplane because these side doors are so big. And then you just kind of move them throughout the aircraft to be able to move these Jeeps around. It was just, like I said, mate, it was just on a different planet. And in the end,
to the Mallard, and every time we have to do these generators for dubs.
Well, and talking logistics, while we're kind of on the topic, the logistics of maintaining this aircraft are nuts. Some of the things that they had, Coulson's had this huge, big floating pontoon that was basically from the outer float, from the inside of the outer float, that would stretch all the way to the inboard of the fuselage, right? So after a flight, if they needed to do maintenance on an engine, they would tow this big raft and then secure it in between the float and the fuselage. On that raft, they had two huge big work stands, that then they could then position under an engine, and they could do engine work on whichever engine they needed, So that was just on the mooring buoy if you needed to do some kind of servicing there. Then if you need to get this thing and do some deep servicing, you need to get it up on the hard stand, right? So then they'd have the beaching gear. Now the beaching gear is basically, if you imagine like a huge big metal, maybe like almost six foot tall, tall, as big as us maybe, a big metal box with a huge big tractor wheel basically underneath it, right? That's basically what a beaching gear would look like. Now, they needed to get that in the water. They needed a crane to go out and drive down the ramp, drop it in the water, and the big tank is basically a float, so it stays floating. They would then tow that with a boat over to the side of the plane and attach it to the side of the plane for its beaching, There'd be also a third one that goes onto the tail. And then they'd have to maneuver the plane via a boat and with pulleys and everything to tail onto the ramp. And they use a different truck, a tow truck basically. It's huge. And these are all old gear, to then attach to the tail of the Mars and just basically tow it up backwards up the ramp. To see that happen, it takes time, takes probably an hour or so, and a lot of effort with all this gear to move stuff around. And then once it's on the hard stand, if you Google photos of the Mars, you can probably see that these trucks, these old trucks with these huge big, almost look like old what would you call them? Air stairs for the old, for the old aircraft that would back up air stairs to a cabin or an exit. Basically that, but on top of it is this kind of almost like a hut, and the hut would just drive straight over the top of an engine, like a fabric hut, and you basically got your engine workshop there on the back of a truck that you just reverse up onto one of the engines, and you're able to do on-site maintenance, So that was just really cool seeing all that kind of stuff. But I digress. I could talk about this stuff all day, mate. Yep.
No, I love it. No, love it. That's awesome, mate. No, look, I can just imagine you're all, and I know I was excited just back here watching online and everything else, let alone being there. And then I was just so stoked for you for the access that you got and the things you got to see and just how Pete and everyone brought you in and involved you.
Yeah, exactly. So, like you said, it kind of doesn't stop there. I ended up being involved.
But wait, there's more.
Exactly. Yeah, it gets better. So I ended up being involved, hanging around the kind of base for a few days. Everyone, I must say, everyone at Coulson's was amazing. They were very welcoming. Who's this guy all the way from Australia coming to watch us? And like these guys, they're not any, they don't consider themselves anything special. They're just engineers or apprentices. Some of them were the apprentices from Coulson who would normally be working on 737s or their normal Hercules tankers, etc. They were just being tasked to go to the tanker base. A lot of them actually loved it because they were on Sprout Lake for summer, So they were really welcoming. But obviously you make a trip like this with the time off by yourself, you want to make sure you make the most of it. The whole objective of this trip was to see the Mars and to experience the Mars, and I had definitely got that so far. But like you said, I still hadn't seen the last flight yet, and there was more to come. So
There's a few little nuggets lying around, wasn't there?
Yeah, so I had a few connections through the seaplane industry, mainly through my podcast, etc. And one guy was a fellow called Gord Jenkins. Now, this guy's probably a silent hero of the aviation British Columbia community, or not. I wouldn't say hero, but he is he is an absolute legend. Legend's probably more of the word for seaplaning in Canada. He has about 27,000 hours of seaplane experience. 22,000 hours of those are on the Beaver. And about 3,000 hours of those are on what's called a Grumman goose, which is a smaller version, an older version of the Mallard and tail wheel. And Gord still flies them to this day. I think he's late 60s, and he still works for a company up in Port Hardy called Wilderness Seaplanes up there, which I intended to get to. Unfortunately, the drive time and I ended up prioritising the Mars more meant that I couldn't get up there, but because I wanted to see the goose, right? But Gord, I didn't have to drive as far as Port Hardy to experience the goose. And what I meant was I met up with Gord in Campbell River, which is about halfway, I guess, between Sprout and Port Hardy. And Gord was he flies the goose, as I mentioned, permanently, but he's kind of one of those cool guys who has mates with a really rich dude who owns a private goose in really cool shape and well looked after. And Gord gets the keys to it and gets to, take it on flights to air shows, and whenever the owner wants to go out and do some actual goose flying, Gord's the man, right? But just happened to be that on the Saturday, so all this was happening. I think I got there into Canada, I think on a Monday morning. So all of that was, the Mars stuff was kind of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then on the Saturday, there was the Abbotsford International Air Show, which was happening. Now, Abbotsford is located about half an hour's drive east of Vancouver. So for those, British Columbia is all west, and, the Vancouver Island, I might have used the term British Columbia for Vancouver Island a fair bit there, but Vancouver Island is west of Vancouver itself. So all of these places that I'm talking about, Sprout Lake, Victoria, they're all on Vancouver Island. Abbotsford's on the eastern side. So Gord was taking this aeroplane in to Abbotsford Air Show for the air show on the Saturday. But with the final flight of the Mars, this goes back a step as well. Back in the day when the Mars was a firebomber, actively a firebomber, mainly for forest industries, probably, I'm not sure if many people know, but there's normally what's called a bird dog, which is in front of the actual bombing aircraft, right? So you'll generally have something that's a bit smaller. I think Coulson even use a Citation, like jet, as their bird dog for like the Hercules and stuff.
King Air 350s down here they're using. And
Caravans are sometimes used for smaller stuff. But they'll lead, what they do is their job is to lead the main big bomber in. So they're in front of the bomber, and they kind of do the target line that the bomber's got to take, right? And back in the day, the Martin Mars used a Grumman goose as its bomber, as its bird dog. Yeah. So Peter wanted, on the final flight of the Mars, he wanted to do the final flight with the bird dog aircraft, the Goose. And originally it was going to be one of the Wilderness Seaplanes aircraft up in Port Hardy. Unfortunately, because actually one of those aircraft was the aircraft that was used back in the day and still flying today on charters out of Port Hardy. Just a side note quickly, Trent. This company I'm talking about, Wilderness Seaplanes, one of the main reasons why I wanted to see them is because us, Paspaley Aviation, and them, Wilderness Seaplanes, are the only two twin-engine flying boat charter aircraft left in the world, basically. Yeah. The two operators. So that's the main reason why I wanted to go visit them. You
mentioned that, yeah.
Yeah. So couldn't get them because the flight ended up being planned for the Sunday, for the last flight of the Mars, and unfortunately they needed it for flying in general on Sunday, so they couldn't provide it. So the next best thing was to use this other goose that was they call Gord's goose because he's the one who generally flies it, right? So after the Abbots Air Show, so I go and meet Gord and help him wash down this plane, the goose, the day before to make sure it's all shiny for the air show. We then fly the Grumman goose into Abbotsford. I got to sit up front in the right seat, not flying from the left, but it was cool to see that aeroplane and twin 985 radial engines next to my head in this cool little Grumman tailwheel goose. We go to the air show. That's amazing fun, talking to all these people. I actually got to see, it was really neat, got to see a couple of people who follow me on socials on that Mallard Guy who were there at the air show. So they come and said hello, which was really cool. And then, sorry, just one sec. And then we flew the Goose after the air show straight to Sprout Lake and landed it on Sprout and ramped it at the tanker base there, and we overnighted there, which was incredible. So it was arranged for the next day.
What ramping means to those that aren't familiar.
So, putting the wheels down in the water after the landing. Obviously, landing an amphibious aircraft with the wheels down beforehand is fatal. So we land on the water with the wheels up, put the wheels down, drive up the big boat ramp, and leave it there for the night. Now, on this aeroplane for the final flight, so our plan was, okay, we're going to now fly the Goose around and follow the Mars on its final flight. So to have a seat available and for them to make a seat available for me for that was incredible. I couldn't believe that was lining up. That was I thought there's got to be other people who are more involved with the Mars that would want to be doing this or have it available for them. But a lot of them actually just wanted to watch it for its final takeoff or for the arrival into Vancouver for the final landing. So, into Victoria. Anyway, we got the group of people on board. There was an ex-Mars pilot. There was an ex-Mars guy who flew Mallards, and we kind of got talking, and we believe that we both flew. He flew one of our Mallards out of Vancouver Island many, many years ago, probably like 40, 50 years ago, which was
nice.
Which was crazy to think. Actually, it would have been 30 or 40 years ago. And a couple of other people who were involved in the Mars. So I think there was about 7 of us in total on this aircraft. And then what happened was probably one of the most amazing air-to-air flights I've ever been involved with. We got airborne and then literally followed the Martin Mars for the next 3 hours on a flight from Sprout Lake all the way up Vancouver Island, from town to town, flying basically at 500 feet along the coast to say goodbye to this aircraft, because this airplane has protected all of these communities on the island for 60 years or thereabouts. And the plan was every town was it couldn't have been perfect, mate. More perfect. It was a Sunday. It was blue skies. It was a lovely day. Every town we flew past along the waterfront, there was hundreds, if not thousands, of people along the harbour there. And they first saw the Goose fly past, and then they saw the great Martin Mars behind us. And we had some great opportunities to fly, wingtip to wingtip type thing, forward and aft. I got to put a great reel up I put together of the whole flight, that shows the airborne footage. And then on the way back down, we then had to say goodbye to the aircraft because we were then flying to Victoria Airport. As I mentioned, the last landing spot for the Mars was in I think it was called Pat Bay, to the west of Victoria Airport. It's literally like, if you look at it on a map, it's airport and then the boundary of the airport's on the water basically. So we came in, we made the final approach into the runway that basically overflew Pat Bay. It couldn't have been a better wind for it. And what we saw was incredible. There must have been 20,000 people lining the shoreline, the jetty, the hills around. The Coast Guard had actually buoyed off a certain landing area for the Mars. So, but beyond that, there was just it was like the Sydney to Hobart Harbour race. There was just boats everywhere, man. And we overflew that and landed. Unfortunately, I couldn't get down there for the final landing of the Mars, but what they were doing in the background was they were then loitering around to meet up with a group called the Canadian Snowbirds. The Snowbirds. So for the Aussies, these are probably like our roulettes, I guess you'd say. They use these, I don't know what the aircraft type is, I'd have to Google that one, but it's a jet engine aircraft. Maybe you can get your team of monkeys in the background, mate, to look up that one while I talk. There's 10 of them in total. They used 9, I think, for this flight, but they met up with Pete in the Mars and flew 3 off each wingtip and then 3 behind, with smoke on, and they arrived over Pat Bay and did a flyby. And that's a video you can see online easily. That was just insane to watch that come past. In some ways, it took the noise of the Mars out a little bit for that pass, but then it did a lap of Victoria and went down to the main town, then flew back, and it was by itself by that stage, and then then came in and lined up. Unfortunately, the sun was right behind it from the west on landing, so some of the video footage you got the sun right behind it, which is not ideal, but did its final touchdown in Pat Bay there, and then pulled up on the mooring. And I was then kind of invited to attend like a very informal drinks and snacks at the BC Aviation Museum that afternoon after the event had occurred, and where Pete and Rick, the two pilots, had then joined us later on for some interviews and a drink, and it was insane, mate. That was the end of it. And then I guess beyond that, the aircraft then after a couple of weeks, has finally made its final resting point at the BC Aviation Museum, where it's now currently being shown off to the public. I think in stages, so I think they have to build the infrastructure around the aircraft to be able to show off extra things of it, but you can go to BC Aviation. It's not undercover at the moment. I think there is plans to build a big hangar over the top of it in the future, but this aircraft's never been hanging in its life, so I don't think being hanging is going to be a huge issue for it because of its size. But you can go there, you can see it through as I mentioned, the BC Aviation Museum, and get to experience the size of this thing, and hopefully make your imagination take you back to some times when this thing was operating on the water, because it was certainly spectacular for me, a dream come true.
Yeah, look, it is. It was just, I think, just for the way the community and Coulson's and everyone involved just got behind it and supported it and recognised the significance of the occasion, I think was just fantastic. And like I said, just watching other people's videos and yours, it was just so good. And it just really makes you proud to be an aviator and to see how much impact it makes on the community and the role that aircraft and the Philippine made on those around it, because it was literally a lifeline, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, the community was one thing that really took me back. I was able to meet a lot of people who I'm now in contact with through socials, who, there's such lovely people. Anyone, like, that's what I love about aviation in general, is you get on the same page, you got the same common interest, and
just best mates.
All of a sudden, you're best mates. You're over their place for dinner on the lake or whatever, and you're swimming off their pontoon at the bottom of they're taking you out on the boat every time the Mars goes out. Just amazing people. So that was, it was incredible to see. People were tearing up about it. When on the final flight before we had to get into the Goose and do our takeoff, I think there was probably over 100 boats just sitting shut down, just floating around the Mars. And then it was almost like seeing a shuttle launch, right?
Yeah.
Because you'd see the crew, they came out, and then, they came down to their boat, and they're in their flight suits, and it's like, there they are, there's the crew, and everyone's waving. And as soon as they got on their launch to go out to the boat, to the aircraft, all of these horns just started going off over the whole lake. All these people just so excited and wanted to cheer them and thank them. And, no one wanted the plane to go, don't get me wrong, but like it was the day, and there was just boats everywhere. And so there was people in tears. It was the end of a very long era of these aircraft sitting on Sprout Lake for the community, which was something that I was blown away by, which was incredible. Now, I guess we have to talk about Trent. Sorry, I'm kind of running your podcast here a little bit. That's what good hosts do, I guess, don't they? So this opportunity now it's good time. I'm glad we finally got this out, because hopefully it comes out soon enough that the aircraft hasn't left yet. But Philippine Mars, the second one we've spoke about a few times in this show, is about to be doing the same thing. Now, this one won't be as much fanfare. I guess there's a couple of reasons for that. The first thing is that the Hawaii Mars, which is the one that we've been mainly talking about, was probably used more over and it was painted in more of the colours of Coulson, but it was probably used more recently out of the two. Philippine Mars hasn't flown actually for 17 years, and it's now been returned to its original US Navy colours,
dark
paint
navy
scheme.
blue. Yeah, like the Catalinas and that.
Yeah, so, but this aircraft is actually being ferried this month, if not in early December. I think they're having a few engine issues at the moment. They had to do a engine change, I think, for this one recently. But this aircraft will be flown and relocated to Arizona in America. So I think there's not going to be as much going on, especially in Canada, about its departure. I don't know what the United States are doing, but it's going to a museum, the Pima Air and Space Museum in Tucson, Arizona. Now, people who know that area, I'm not too familiar, but Arizona's pretty famous, I think, for its deserts.
It's pretty dry.
Pretty dry. Where do you put a big flying boat? There's apparently
get everyone's hoses out.
Exactly, get everyone's hoses out. One thing I have heard, I think, is that it will be landing at a lake potentially over 200 miles away, and then being dismantled and trucked to the museum, and then put back together.
Such logistics, isn't it?
Such logistics. But I have also heard that this one will actually be going through San Francisco and San Diego on its way, with stopovers in those spots. So if you're in that area,
a bit of an overshoot and then come back in. I guess. I suppose it comes down and then across.
Well, exactly. Yeah, it probably has to clear customs or something and do whatever it needs to do in there, and then we'll be flown to its final spot. But I think, Trent, like, my original goal was to see potentially the last ever 4-engine flying boat fly ever again. I might have got the second last, because this potentially will be the last. So it's an incredible historic event, really, in aviation and in seaplanes and flying boats. So if anyone has the opportunity to go and see it, if you're already over that area, it's now winter time over in that part of the world, so it's going to be cold. And interesting, looking at there's a really good Facebook group you can join. I think it's just called Martin Mars. Look it up, or JRM3 Martin Mars or something like that. The contrast of the photos that are coming out from everyone posting photos of Philippine Mars doing its taxi runs, because they're actually doing very similar to the Hawaii Mars. They're getting people on board with this one as well. It's very gloomy. It's very grey. There's lots of low cloud over the hills.
I'm looking at some now. It's exactly that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Just
so
the reflections on the water.
Potentially that's going to cause a lot of logistics issues that I didn't have to deal with my risky trip, mate. So, but yeah, I think there's probably some stuff I haven't touched on, mate, that we could talk about more, but that's pretty much summary. It was probably one of the best trips I've ever done. And a big shout out to my wife for encouraging me and permitting me to do such a trip. I think someone asked her, how could you let him go on such a big thing, while you got to look after the kids by yourself and everything like that? And I think her response was, how could I not let him go? So, you're onto a winner when your wife backs you for that. So,
and we were all here to help out if needed, so it was all good.
Yeah, exactly, mate. You did offer
we
it.
had your back.
So that's amazing. But yeah, it was something I'll treasure for the rest of my life, being involved to that degree. And, a huge shout out as well to Peter Killen, who this is a man who just will do anything to make sure people are happy, basically. And he certainly did that during my time there, and someone else stay in touch with. Yeah.
It's too big a plane to hog to yourself, isn't it? You got to share it with others. Yeah. It's just too much to charge airplane.
He was so flat out that whole week that I was there, there's no such thing as duty time for this kind of stuff. He was just there at the base first thing in the morning, and they were prepping the airplane. They were talking. He was doing interviews. He was showing people around who wanted to be showed around. There's obviously all the guests that are coming down. And then
very selfless.
Yeah. Oh yeah, mate. He made sure that everyone got to experience this and be a part of it, which was an incredible gesture and an incredible human to do that. And everyone else along the way that I got to meet, it was just really cool. to do the trip and meet a lot of people that I'd been in touch with over socials because I couldn't get out, mainly because I've met a lot of people through COVID with my podcast, and yeah,
which is basically how you started. So
yep,
that would have been great. And that also included one other aircraft we haven't talked about, which was your first radial Mallard.
Yes, mate. Yes, I had. There's a couple of aircraft I haven't. That's two now. There's
There's a couple more there, but yeah, that's
well, yeah.
Can't remember the serial number, 57 or something, or 47 or whatever, but it was that beautiful sort of maroon and white hull.
Yep.
Radial Mallard. Yeah.
Yep. So it's pretty
54.
embarrassing. 54, and pretty embarrassing that I call myself that Mallard guy and have never actually seen a radial Mallard before. That was another part of that first day when I went to see the BC Aviation Museum. This is just another one of those classic things, like I get there on the Monday, go to the museum, and then we had a bit of a connection through the Mallards here with a company called Victoria Air Maintenance that are based at that airport, same airport, right, who have done a bit of work for us, etc. And that's where the Mallard was kept, right, at a hangar at this airport. And the pilot for that airplane, it's a privately owned radial Mallard with a beautiful, I've got a video of it on my Instagram if you want to check that one out, but great club seating in it, leather seats. It's an incredible condition.
Beautifully restored.
Exactly.
Maintained.
And the pilot who flies it I got his contact details. He still flies seaplanes over there. I think he's late 60s. He's very similar to Gord, right? And anyway, turns out I've had a lot of good luck in this story, I guess, but this was a bit of bad luck. It was like a public holiday on the Monday, right? So this maintenance company's not open. And I drive in there. There's no one around, right? There's no one there. But randomly, the Mallard is out of the hangar, just sitting there on the apron. And so I park the car along the fence there, and I'm just sitting there kind of adoring seeing an aircraft that I fly with radial engines. And, this is a very, there's only 59 Mallards ever built. So to see a radial Mallard just sitting there was pretty rare in itself. And I'm not even kidding, Trent. Like I can't see into the cockpit or anything. It's maybe 15 meters away from me, and it's facing me and the fence, but I can't see into the cockpit. You can't even script this, right? The engine just starts. The right engine just starts up, right? I'm like, what the hell? And the way it's pointing is a dead end of the taxiway, so it can't go anywhere. So I'm like, this is weird. Anyway, I messaged the dude who was flying it, and I know he's out on a flight up the top of, he was up like the top of Vancouver Island near Port Hardy or something, and I messaged him saying, mate, the engine just started. Like, it's not you, is it? And he's like, no, I'm still away. It must be this other guy. I think his name was Mel. He said, it must be Mel. Go and say hello. And I was like, I can't get into the airport. Anyway, text me the hangar gate code, right? So I put the gate code in and go over there and go to it was the starboard engine, the right engine. So then I see this guy, an older fella, probably in his 70s, sitting in the cockpit in the left seat. And I just kind of go over there and say hello. And he goes, jump in. So I go and jump in the back and go up to the cockpit while he's still running this engine up and introduce myself. And he knows all about the Paspaley Mallards, and I think he helped. He turns out he's an engineer and ex-pilot as well. So anyway, got to have a good look around that and everything. Then later in the day, Bernie actually had a flight in it. Bernie's the guy who actually flew it. And he had a flight in it with the owner. So I came back at the end of the day after he got back from his flight, and then got to watch it taxi out. And then we went up to the hill, nearby hill, for a little bit of a spotters area. And got to watch it take off, which was really cool. No water work, obviously, but all runway. But to hear the radials roar as it went past was pretty neat. So yeah, thanks to Bernie for letting me have a look at that and seeing a radial Mallard, which was pretty cool. But also on that airport as well was a Catalina, and I was introduced to a guy through Steve Stackhouse as well, who lined up a meeting with a guy, Bob Dick, who was an ex-Mars firebombing pilot and also a Catalina firebombing pilot, who was about in his probably mid-70s, and Bob just on a Monday came down to the airport. 15 minutes later, he only lived nearby, and took me for a tour all through this Catalina that he used to own, and was sitting in the cockpit of this thing, and it's in a bit of a state, needs a bit of work, but just was sitting there soaking in all about flying the Catalina with him, and in this, just these there were very special moments with these, these people are real icons and inspirational people to me, if you know what I mean. Like I read a lot of books about the old flying boat eras of the 40s and 50s, and Bob used to do these safari flights in Catalinas through Africa. He used to fly from the north to the south in Catalinas and doing safaris. And in fact, it took me back to he had a little hangar there with a biplane in it. He doesn't fly any longer, unfortunately. But all this Catalina memorabilia in his hangar was like a treasure trove. And on the wall, he had a picture of a flight manifest, and it was one where he took Bill and Melinda Gates for a safari on the Catalina down through Africa. So, that was very special. So, just these bits of seaplane, seaplanes are huge over there. So, just the constant roar of beavers overflying on straight floats, and then you'll see a twin otter going over the top as well. And, anyway, it was incredible. I then finished on the Monday by going down to back to Victoria, got a flight on the Otter again with James, luckily enough, back to Vancouver. And then I went to Vancouver has 2 harbour air bases. There's one, I think it's called Downtown, and one's at the airport. So it's on a river near the actual main international airport. And that one is famous for its, I think it's called the Flying Beaver Cafe. And people go down there. It's this beautiful bar on the river, and the docks are right there in front of you. So you can just sit there, have a beer, have a pizza. It's outside of the airport boundaries, so you can go there on whatever. You don't have to be flying to go there.
Yeah.
And you just watch seaplanes take off and land along the river there all day long. And I met up with a mate there who I'd interviewed on my podcast as well, Connor Doucette, who's an absolute ripper of a bloke. And Connor and I having a beer, and then went and watched them get the non-amphibious straight float seaplanes out of the river and put into their parking lot. So basically, if you imagine this river, right, there's a road that runs along it, and then there's a boat ramp, and then on the other side of the road, on the other side of the river, like, so you got river, boat ramp, road, and then you've got like basically a set of hangars, right, that are gated off. That's where all the aircraft are kept, but they're non-amphibious, right? So they can't just drive up the ramp and taxi into the parking area. So they use this thing, and this video has gone viral on my Instagram. It's a video of a truck.
Half a car.
Exactly.
Half a ute.
The F75 is what everyone is calling it, because it's like a Ford 150 pickup truck, but no tail end of it. So it's just 2 wheels, the front cab bit, and then it leads out to a trailer with hydraulics that basically what the guys do is they drive the seaplane onto the wooden ramp and basically beach it, if you know what I'm kind of saying, and then shut the engine down, and then this car just crosses the road. All these boom gates come down like it's like a train crossing, stop any cars, and this dude drives across in this funny looking F75 and drives this trailer underneath the floats and jacks up the plane using the spreader bars, which are the 2 horizontal bars that connect the floats, and then they just take it over and drop it onto its keels of the floats into the yard. And that's how
they seem to just set it on the bitumen. It doesn't even sit on a little foam cradle or anything, which I was surprised at.
Couldn't see if they put anything under the keel strip, or if they had like mats or anything, but generally the keel strip is solid enough to support the aircraft. So some non-amphibious seaplanes will actually land on the floats on grass strips, for example. If they need to do their maintenance, or it's the end of the season, they might take it to an airfield and just land it on the keels of the floats, and that's pretty common. You see them launch. There's a lot of videos of like launching seaplanes on the back of a trailer, where the car drives down the runway with a seaplane on the back of it on a trailer, and basically just with the engine running. And as soon as you get to speed, you just power on and lift off and fly off the trailer. So that video went pretty viral. It was pretty funny to see the interest in that one. But yeah,
Well,
mate, so it
it's
topped
just-
up an
just
amazing
very
week.
unique, isn't it?
That's right, unique, and that's the whole grab, I guess, of seaplane flying for me, is the uniqueness and the adventure that seaplane flying brings. So it topped off an absolute. That, you know, having a beer that last night with Connor there and sitting down watching seaplanes go off before I caught my direct flight back to Brisbane just topped off an absolute incredible week.
Just
and,
reflect on the week that was. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, look, it is. It's something that they are special. It's special enough what we do on a day-to-day basis, but then to get to fly some of these aircraft that, we've flown, and the Warbirds, and, keeping the Mallard going like we have been there at PAS, and all the stuff over there. It's just awesome to be part of. So thank you very much for reflecting with me and sharing on that adventure that you had. It was just unreal.
Oh, it's been great, mate. We've obviously been doing this for a while, and it's making me get a bit itchy. I'm like, I need to go over and watch the Philippine guy as well.
Maybe I could go see the Philippines.
It's dying down. It's wet season now. We don't fly that often now. So
but we got to plan our trip to Oshkosh or something, and
that's true.
Go do a bit of a AvGeek museum tour and the Smithsonian, all these things. I think one day.
That sounds like a plan, mate.
Fantastic. All right. Well, everyone, if you haven't already, you should be on the step following with Dan. So that's his podcast on Spotify, Apple, all the usual places. And of course, for some of that amazing footage, which is very unique because it was only Dan's camera up in the air getting some of that. Get on the Instagram channel there, that Mallard Guy, and you will be able to see a lot of the stuff that we've just been talking about in pretty much chronological order. All right, mate. Well, we are long overdue for a fly, so I know that it'll be probably January before I get to go up in the beautiful Mallard again. But until then, we'll keep hanging out on the tarmac, and I'll talk to you very soon. But thanks for joining me today.
Always look forward to seeing your name next to my name on the roster, mate, and and lining up a flight out to Koori, and knowing that it's going to be a fun and enjoyable flight together. So, luckily we don't live far from each other, and we get to see each other from time to time around the airport. So our catch-ups in between aren't too far in between. But
definitely.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Trent. And once again, congratulations on the success of the podcast. And look forward to another chat in the future about something seaplane related, mate, I'm sure.
Definitely. No, thanks, mate. We'll talk soon. Dan Bolton there, that Mallard Guy. Thanks, mate. Absolutely fantastic chat. Incredible experience for anyone interested in aviation, in flying boats and aeroplanes. Just cannot recommend enough to go and check out Dan's Instagram page. Just search for that Mallard Guy. And there's some fantastic videos and share in Dan's experiences there as well. And of course, he's not getting a heap of episodes out at the moment, but he is got a huge catalogue of fantastic aviation interviews on the step. Search for it on Spotify and Apple and go have a listen. All right, guys, that is it. A huge episode today, but thanks for sticking with me, and I will see you next week. Until then, blue skies, and remember the golden rule: aviate, navigate, communicate. Cheers, everyone.